In 2016, something happened that football still struggles to explain. Leicester City became champions of England, a team with 5,000 to 1 odds at the very top of the Premier League. It was called the greatest underdog story of all time, the kind of moment that feels impossible to repeat, the kind of story that should last forever, but it didn't, because 10 years later, Leicester City have been relegated to League One, from the very top of English football to the 3rd tier. And the question is no longer how they won the league, it's how everything collapsed. Welcome to Hidden Club Stories, where every club carries a story. This is the story of Leicester City. Before Leicester became champions, they were something far less predictable. They were a club that seemed to exist in moments rather than seasons, where everything could change in the space of a few seconds. And nowhere was that more visible than one night in the playoffs. The game had reached its breaking point, a penalty was awarded, a chance to take control, to step closer to the Premier League. The stadium held its breath as the shot was taken, but it was saved. And in that instant, before anyone had time to process what just happened, the ball was already moving in the opposite direction. What followed felt almost unreal. A counterattack unfolding at full speed, defenders chasing shadows. The entire weight of the moment shifted from one end of the pitch to the other. And then, just seconds later, it was over. Deeney had scored. In the time it takes to understand what you're seeing, Leicester had gone from the edge of promotion to complete collapse. It was chaotic, brutal, the kind of moment that stays with a club. And for Leicester, it became part of their identity. Because nothing about this team followed a straight line, they didn't rise steadily, they didn't build in predictable ways, they fell. They failed, they came close and lost. And yet, somehow, they kept moving forward. When Leicester finally reached the Premier League a couple seasons later, it didn't feel like the beginning of something. It felt like a test. From the very first weeks, it became clear that they were not at the level of the teams around them. The pace was different, the quality was higher, the margin for error almost non-existent. As the season went on, the table began to reflect that reality. They dropped points, they lost games they couldn't afford to lose, and slowly, they slipped toward the bottom. But by the time the final months arrived, survival no longer felt like a possibility. It felt like something that had already been decided. But football has a way of shifting when you least expect it. Without warning, results started to turn. Performances improved, confidence returned, and suddenly the same team that had looked out of place began to look competitive. It wasn't a complete transformation, it wasn't dominant, but it was enough. Enough to change the direction of the season, enough to move them out of danger, enough just to survive. And that should have been the story, a newly promoted team that stayed in the league against the odds, a small success in a system that rarely allows it. But for Leicester, survival wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. The following season didn't start with expectations. There were no predictions placing Leicester at the top of the table, no conversations about them competing for anything beyond survival. They were still the same club, still outsiders, still underestimated. But something had changed beneath the surface. There was a clarity in the way they played, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. Matches began to follow a pattern, not chaotic, not unpredictable, but controlled. They defended with discipline, attacked with precision, and most importantly, they made very few mistakes. While other teams struggled with inconsistency, Leicester seemed to find stability. And that stability turned into momentum. As the weeks passed, they stayed near the top, and then they refused to leave it. At first it felt like a coincidence, then it felt like form, and eventually it became impossible to ignore. Because Leicester City were not fading away, they were moving forward, towards something no one had prepared for. toward a title that didn't belong to them until it did. In 2016, they won the Premier League. And now, only 10 years later, it's no longer a possibility. It's no longer something that could happen, it actually happened. Leicester City have been relegated to League One. Not fighting to stay up, not hoping for a miracle, relegated. And that is what makes this moment so difficult to understand. Because when you look at this team, you don't see a squad that belongs in the third tier of English football. You see experience. Harry Winks controlling games in midfield, Stephy Mavididi with the ability to change matches in seconds, Patson Daka, a striker who had already proven himself at the highest level, and Ricardo Pereira, a player who has spent years competing in the Premier League. This is not a weak team. This is not a club that was expected to fall this far, and yet they have. Because this isn't just relegation, this is a complete collapse. A fall that doesn't feel gradual, but sudden, even if it took years to unfold. And when you step back and look at it clearly, the reality becomes even harder to process. Because this is not just any club, this is Leicester City. A team that, not so long ago, stood at the very top of English football. And now, they are going down to League One. When you look at this story in its entirety, one detail makes it even more difficult to believe. It has only been 10 years. 10 years since Leicester City stood at the very top of the Premier League. 10 years since they achieved something the world still struggles to explain. And in that same space of time, they have fallen all the way down to League One. Not over generations, not as part of a slow decline that took decades, but within a single football era. And football loves to celebrate its greatest stories. The moments that remind us why we believe in this game, why we watch it, why we think that anything is possible. Leicester City gave us one of those moments. They showed the world that the impossible could happen. That a team no one expected could rise above everything and everyone. But what makes this story complete is not just the miracle, it's what came after. Because in football, success is never permanent. It shifts, it fades, and sometimes it disappears faster than anyone expects. Leicester's story is not just about winning the Premier League, it is about how fragile that moment really was. How quickly it can slip away, and how even the most perfect stories can come to an end. Thank you for watching this episode of Hidden Club Stories. If you want to discover more clubs with identity, history and soul, make sure to subscribe, because somewhere out there another story is already waiting.